What's up to all my conscious nature dwellers out there? It's your boy Ian, aka the Lit Professor, here today to drop the second lesson in the Spiritual Ecology Course. Today we are covering Chapter 2, Shadow, in David Abram's book Becoming Animal. And the chapter runs from page 13 to page 24. And if you guys would like to join the course, you guys can go to this link that you see on the screen right now and get more info or watch the intro video. So, boom. Today's video is not going to be as intense or as long as last video because the concept today is deep but not too deep, because we are talking about the shadow and depth ecology, as Abram calls it, in terms of the shadow. So, first of all, the first couple pages of the chapter speak for themselves. And this is beautiful nature writing. And take a deep look at what he's doing here, because this is what good writers do. This is an example of great writing. And when it comes to nature writing, it is even better. And one of the main things he does, which I love and which I always advocate for all my students in the Lit University, is that the elimination of most pronouns. And he kind of gets a little bit weirder because he moves into the second person and is using you a lot. But he doesn't even use you that often. He's using a lot of verbs and descriptive words. I could say, I see my shadow on, fading away into the sunset. Or I could say, shadows fade into the sunset as the night calls over the mountain or over the horizon. That was off the top of my head. Which one sounded better? But for whatever reason, people love, because of the personal narrative that we were taught in high school and in college, to use just pronouns, I, me, my, we, and it goes on and on. But people don't realize is that creates a separation between you and the reader. Every time I say I, the reader thinks that it's themselves. They say I, Ian, but no, it's not I, Ian, it's I, David. But if you can eliminate that, if you can remove the illusion, or remove the block, then you can create the illusion that we're supposed to be doing with writing in the first place. So and we'll talk about more about that later. And so what David is talking about here, or Abrams is talking about here, is that the shadow is our axiomatic expression. And that's why it is the first thing talked about, is that if I look at my shadow, let's move on here. If we look at our shadow, we think our shadow is flat, and that, I'm walking and I have this flat shadow, but there is space between us and the shadow. And starting to observe this is the first step in gaining the phenomenological awareness we talked about in the intro video. Shadows don't exist after a certain point of elevation. After we go above the clouds and above other things, suddenly shadows become more obsolete. It is a shared experience of all kingdoms of the ground level earth. All of us share the concept of shadows. Plants, mammals, rocks, all of us have that shared experience. The only things that don't are maybe windows and the wind, as Abrams talked about. So it's so cool that he did this at the very start. The first thing he talks about past the intro is the shadow. And rereading this, for the course, that blew my mind once again. When I read it blew my mind. But just seeing after, and knowing where he's going to go, it's just like, wow. Most people never talk about that. And most people think that their shadow is flat. If we talk about it, we think it's like Peter Pan or whatever. But there is space between us and the shadow, and there is expansiveness. There is an expansiveness, we'll just go back to that first photo, between us and the shadow. And so let's say there's this shadow on my side of my face right here. There is a length of shadow, though, that expands out. If we're looking at our shadow, it is 3-dimensional, if not 4-dimensional or 5-dimensional if we want to get super trippy. Or if you are super trippy, that is. And that's mind-blowing in and of itself, because once again, we are just trying to get back to the basics, back to the fundamentals of phenomenological awareness right now. That's what I am teaching us right now, because everyone has lost that. People walking around every day aren't thinking about the depth of their shadow. And if you can't even think about the depth of your shadow, then how are you supposed to move on to the depth of other things? And that's what I think is super cool. So let's move on to a quote. some nice photos of the shadow. So this living shadow is born afresh every dawn, or rather, the shadow is what remains of the night as the night's gloom flees gloom flees the advance of the rising sun. And that's a pretty cool concept, is that, and that's what we see at the start. If you read the first couple pages, it's this descent into the world of shadow, which is nighttime. Night is just all shadow. We don't think about that, but in the day we think of light. But then as he gets even deeper, is that, during the shadows during the day are hints of the night, which is so cool, because if we want to get in, and he doesn't take it here, but just the psychological concept of the shadow and duality and polarity within us, it's around us at all times, and we just don't see it. If we look into and read between the lines and look around us, the metaphors exist. And guess what? People in primitive societies probably weren't doing that. They weren't making this connection that I'm making now. And Abrams doesn't even make this connection. But if we're trying to ascend to higher consciousness, we don't need phones. We don't even need books at all these times. It can help, but we don't need any of the stuff because it exists all around us, which is pretty freaking crazy. It exists, in these momentary pictures, in these ideas. As we're just looking at these photos, they're everywhere. Every single moment we can see that this is occurring. So then we can I'm just taking you guys through these photos just for fun. And to quote Abrams again, do we notice this? Do we feel somehow different at high noon when the darkness has seeped into us? Do we feel the weight of our own shadow? And let's talk about that. Do we feel somehow different at high noon when the darkness has seeped into us? So he's talking about this concept I was talking about. At high noon, there is no shadow. Suddenly our shadow disappears. Shadows start disappearing at that time of the day, especially if you're in like a flatlands area. Does the darkness seep into us? It does. And do we feel the weight of our own shadow, the press of its difficult knowledge against the inside of our own torso and skull? That's pretty crazy that the shadow then is external and then gets consumed into us. He's speaking of this because if you're just looking at this from a phenomenological angle, where does the shadow go? We can say, well, obviously with the physics and all. But if we're looking at this from a little bit deeper, if we've taken the next step, everybody, it is absorbing into us. Is it the shadow itself that looks out through our eyes at midday? Small wonder that so many traditional peoples give themselves over to siesta and sleep for an hour or two at this time, letting their tissues and organs respond to this interior visitation by the night, allowing the many cells or souls within them to be tutored by the darkness that has taken temporary refuge within their flesh. Are you freaking kidding me? That is such a deep concept that at midday, do you ever get that midday sleepiness? Like I do. I mean, if I'm eating good and energized, I don't. But sometimes, you get that midday drowning out. And what is that? I've always, we'll just be honest here. I've always attributed that to carbohydrates, that people eat a ton of gluten and stuff in the middle of the day. But that is a real concept. And the energy does get sucked out of us. At 10 p.m., or excuse me, 10 a.m. or 12 p.m., 12 p.m. feels a lot more intense when the shadows don't exist anymore. And I feel like, and what Abram is maybe talking about is there is a lack of perception going on within the middle of the day. So be mindful of that as we're going on, because today's exercise and homework is to observe your shadow throughout the day, in the morning, at noon, and then at midday or at dusk time, and see if it feels different. Make personal observations and then record them. And I think, like you said, you're going to feel something similar to what Abram is talking about right here, about how you want to give yourself over to the shadow. And it's also kind of weird that at midday, and this is kind of this might be a personal thing, but it seems like a lot of things happen midday. The affair happens at midday. At lunch, we all, at the break of the day, people take their bump of their vice, whether it be another coffee or another substance. They go sleep with their mistress. There's always these weird things that happen at midday. And is that this weird metaphor for darkness? I don't know. But that's just something that I've observed. So then we kind of get into this concept of the power. Oh, maybe do I have this quote? Okay. Boom. We'll just look at these two photos real fast, of the mountain. I was supposed to place these a little bit someplace else. So, quote again, has my shadow now dissolved and dissipated, or is it present but hidden, swallowed within the wider shade of evening? And we're talking about evening now, everybody. We have moved back down now into evening, and that's why I kind of showed this transition now. We're moving into evening time. We talked about midday. Let's move into evening. Or is it the evening itself nothing other than the garment woven over all our disparate shadows from those separate darknesses that walk on their own during the day, yet gather themselves into a common thickness as the sun slides behind the hills? So that our individual shadow, as we have said, is our own private patch of night, torn from the black cloak every morning as we stumble out to greet the day. I mean, this is so deep. I mean, we can go over this line by line. Has my shadow now dissolved and dissipated? And we're talking about at night when, dusk comes. Or is it present but hidden, swallowed within the wider shade of evening? So imagine being under a tree, right? And suddenly you can't see your shadow anymore, but you're under the shadow of a tree. Have you really lost your shadow, or is your shadow just now been consumed by the tree shadow? And we think that concept still happens at night. Or is the evening itself nothing other than the garment woven from all of our disparate shadows, from those separate darknesses that walk on their own during the day, yet gather themselves into a common thickness as the sun slides behind the hills? So what he's trying to say here is that at night, is it all of our shadows combined, all of the shadows in the, I guess in our region combined to create the darkness, which is freaking crazy, And once again, the empiricist says, "Oh, no, the sun goes behind the moon or whatever, and the earth, and we can't see it." Yes, I know. But have you ever thought a little bit deeper? That's what's going on here, everyone. This is so fun. How playful is this? How crazy is this? How deep is this, everybody? This is my third time reading this, and I'm still mind blown. Are you mind blown? Maybe. Say what's up, everybody. If you're listening right now, say what's up in the comments. Tell me about your experience with the shadow. Leave your, I should be saying this earlier, but subscribe to the channel. Say what's up. Join the course. You guys know the business. I don't need to lecture you guys. You guys are smart enough to know this. So then finishing this up, so that our individual shadow, as we have said, is our own private patch of night, torn from the black cloak every morning as we stumble out to greet the day. Now that is a fire concept, and he just kind of explicated what I was saying a little bit, that, is our shadow just, our private patch of night, and then we have to give it back every single night. That's pretty crazy. And now we're going to start talking about the power of the mountains, man. And, we live in a world now, like my house right now, there's all these shadows that are being created, but if all these houses were torn down, I just live in a flat desert area with mountains, not too far away, but I live in this flat area. But now through buildings and through skyscrapers, if you live in New York City or Philadelphia or Los Angeles, suddenly, or an apartment complex, suddenly you are consumed into the shadow of these buildings, much as something would be, this house is about to be consumed by the shadow of the mountain. And I mean, and he talks about how when you are in the shadow of a mountain, how you become the mountain. Just how, how we were talking about how your shadow gets into the mountain. And it's a crazy concept because there is a different vibe. If anyone has spent a lot of time on a mountain after sunset, and I sure have as a skier and, a hiker, when that mountain goes down and when it's, before sunrise, it's kind of a different vibe. Something kind of changes in the animals and the insects. Everything starts acting a little bit differently. And is it because we have become now a part of the mountain? And I think it is we have, because the shadow is not a flat thing. It stretches across of us. The mountain is projecting this thing across us Just how if I was standing above you and you were laying down, my shadow would be projecting onto you. And it would probably be a little bit weird if I was standing over you, but it would be having some sort of an effect because I am standing over you and my shadow's on you. And, just some nice photos to show this, man. I mean, have you ever been at a river when the sun goes down, but it's still sunny outside and the shadow is basking it? Oh, my God. Kayaking, when that happens, it's amazing. Wow, this is a great photo. Beautiful, man. Boom. Next quote. Shadows are qualitative attributes of the bodies that secrete them. They are time-dependent realms that change their contours with the hour and the season. Momentary life zones where the shadow-casting mountain or boulder or body quietly envelops and fathers a range of other boundaries under its sway. And this is so cool because he's almost dissing on the haters here in the sense that he is, he's trying to give life to shadows. That's what this chapter is about. We are trying to give a sense of sentience and consciousness to shadows. And he's saying that there are qualitative attributes that make them bring them somewhat more into that sentient realm, because much like us, we are time dependent and we change, and we are not this stagnant being. That's like one of the things of being existent in objective reality, but also in subjective reality, and in terms of consciousness and being able to lock within time. And I just think that concept's really cool. Maybe reread this quote again real fast. Shadows are qualitative attributes of the bodies that secrete them. They are time-dependent realms that change the contours with the hour and the season. Momentary life zones where the shadow-casting mountain or boulder or body quietly envelops and fathers a range of other boundaries under its sway. So kind of getting into the same concept we were just talking about. And and that's what I'm trying to show with these photos here, is that shadows have life. Like, there is a sense of life. That's why we call it the shadow, our shadow self. And like, photos like this exist, and movies and shadows are used because we have some weird connection to the shadow. And maybe because it's always with us, or maybe it's because of all these other things that we've already talked about. So, last quote of the presentation. Beyond a certain degree of astonished gawking, and Abrams is talking about stargazing to everyone who hasn't done the reading yet. We're talking about stargazing here, and people who are sitting down looking at the stars like this in a prone, either standing or sitting position. By a certain degree of astonished gawking, our necks begin to hurt, and our legs begin to buckle. Typo. Our bodies long to lie down horizontal on the earth. We lend ourselves to gravity, becoming adjuncts of the ground itself. Only by thus renouncing the vertical stance, dropping away our upright individuality and leaning back upon the earth, letting our gaze become the gaze of the earth itself, do we make some sense of the endless depths in which earth dwells. For those depths are not our habitat, they are earth's. And so it's only by unfurling our limbs and settling back into the body of earth that the night sky becomes for us a steady comfort and a womb. And I mean, that's some fire right there if I've ever read it. So let's hop on into this. Beyond a certain degree of so when we lay down, there's an ice cream truck outside of everybody. I was like, what is that? When we go and lean back, our gaze becomes the gaze of the earth itself. Do we make some sense of the endless depths in which the earth dwells? Because we are starting to see the gaze in the totality of the earth. And if the earth is conscious or not conscious, but the earth and its shadow and its shape has its own concept and sentience too. For those depths are not our habitat. They are Earth's when we are looking up at the sky. And we can't look at that forever. We eventually have to lay back and fall asleep because it is so profound. It becomes only by unfurling our limbs and settling back into the body of earth that the night sky becomes for us a steady comfort and a womb. And that's so crazy because we are now resting, letting the earth take over for us. Now it's the earth's job. We have been observing and doing all this stuff for the shadow. Now it's time for the earth to observe itself. You know, and that might be reaching a little bit. Let me know in the comments if that's reaching. And, you know, just some nice photos to end. I mean, it's so nice stargazing. Anyone shout out? Anybody see the meteor shower that happened a couple weeks ago? I think in early August. Started with a P, whatever it was called. I was up in Wyoming, saw some crazy meteors. Haven't seen that many, like, sitting out there a couple hours, man. Saw some crazy ones. And that's it. So let's talk about the assignment and the homework, everybody. So spend a day observing your shadow. During morning, noon, and sunset, spend a couple minutes or a lot more, hopefully, appreciating, reflecting, playing, and being present with your shadow. Make sure you do this before journaling, everybody. And you can move on in the series if you need to. Like, pretend you can't do that for a day and you want to keep going, then, you know, read more and watch more. But before you journal and submit the assignment, you know, make sure you're doing this right. This isn't for me. I don't care if you complete this. You're not getting anything for completing this. What you're getting is hopefully something for you. This is for you. Then make application of these principles in the field are what changes the nature of this book from just being a book to actually something that changes your life. Submit a 100 to 200 word journal reflection that combines your experience with what you learned in the chapter. And the optional bonus is write in the same style David does during the first couple pages of the chapter. Notice his use of verbs and descriptive words instead of pronouns. This is the core of good nature writing. Quick example of that. Let me pull open the book real fast. I haven't even picked out a passage, but he does it the whole time during the first couple pages. The sun gaze grows fainter still. Soon it's possible to stare back at it without wincing as it slowly slips behind the ridge. A final glare, a flaring gleam between the two trees silhouetted on that ridge, and then the sun is gone. And you could say, I watched the sun gaze grow fainter. And then, you know, it's staring back at me and wincing. You could say all that, and that's what's kind of going on, but you don't have to do that. And like I said, challenge yourself to do that. Maybe don't even use a pronoun the whole time during this journal entry if you're going to be talking about your experience. But I would like you guys to do what you learned, but then what he also talked about, some of these concepts we were talking about being consumed by the mountain, and where does the shadows go in darkness. All these things we've talked about. You know, talk about a little bit of both because your personal experiences aren't going to help you on the book report. So that is all, everybody. I will see you guys in chapter 3. That will be dropping soon. Thank you guys for being here. Good luck on everything. Peace.